On June 1st, 1648, Alexei and his court were returning to Moscow from the Trinity St. Sergius Monastery. When the procession reached the city gates, they found the way blocked by a huge crowd. The people of the city had come to present a petition to the Tsar, complaining of the excesses of his bureaucrats. But the Tsar refused to speak to them. His guards drove them away and arrested the ringleaders. The next day, the Tsar was returning from another monastery when he was again met by a huge crowd. They pushed his guards aside, broke through to the Tsar's coach, and seized control of the horses. The 19-year-old Alexei was face to face with his subjects for the first time. Despite being surrounded by an angry mob, he remained calm. He listened to their complaints and promised to stamp out government corruption and to dismiss all bribe takers and embezzlers from office. Top of their list was the Tsar's old tutor, Boris Mazarov. In the course of 2 years, Morozov had amassed a huge personal fortune and made himself the second richest person in Russia. As chief treasurer of the state, he reduced spending by slashing the wages of all bureaucrats, forcing many to accept bribes simply to survive. He appointed friends and allies to offices of state, but only after they paid him an enormous bribe. But Morozov's most dangerous policy had been to raise the tax on salt. Salt was the universal food preservative. When its price rose fourfold, everyone was affected, and the poorest were threatened with starvation. The events that followed were reported in all the courts of Europe. One account was left by a Dutch traveler to Russia, thought to be a spy. A crowd of people forced their way into the palace courtyard. The guards sided with the people and burst into Morozov's house. They trampled everything underfoot, threw his belongings from the windows, and ransacked the place, taking all they could. They shouted furiously, "This is our blood!" Morozov himself escaped into one of His Majesty's chambers and hid there. There were revolts across Russia, from Ustyug and Salvychegodsk in the north to Kursk in the south. The Tsar was under siege in his own palace. The pregnant Tsaritsa nearly miscarried. She gave birth 5 months later, but their first child died within the year. To appease the people, the Tsar ordered the execution of many corrupt officials, but not Morozov. Alexei would not sacrifice his beloved tutor, and instead exiled him to a monastery 300 miles north of Moscow. In response to the salt riots, the National Assembly was urgently convened within the Kremlin. It advised the Tsar that only a comprehensive new legal code could restore order. A special commission was established, in which the Tsar himself took an active role. The result was the Saborny Ulozhenie, a legal code that sought to consolidate all the state's existing laws into a single document for the first time. It would prove a cornerstone of Russian law for centuries to come. The code's 25 chapters and nearly 1,000 articles were copied and glued together into a single roll 309 meters long. After its approval, 1,200 copies were printed and one sent to every major city. The code entrenched the privileges of the nobility, who became the only people legally allowed to own serfs. The status of these peasants was made permanent and hereditary. The Saborny Ulozhenie was in force for almost 200 years, from 1649 until